That massive backlog of games sitting in your library, the ones you bought but never actually finished, is not a personal failure. In fact, it may be a major reason why half the video game industry seems to be quietly falling apart right now, even though it's making more money than ever before. Companies are going private, laying off thousands of employees and writing off hundreds of millions of dollars during what should be the biggest boom the industry has ever seen. So, let's figure out what's really going on. By the end of this video, you'll understand the one resource these companies are actually fighting over and why it's not the one you'd expect. Let's get into it. Let's start with the part that genuinely doesn't add up on paper. This industry now generates somewhere between $200 and $350 billion a year, depending on how you measure it, making it the biggest entertainment business on the planet, bigger than movies and music combined. More people are playing games now than ever before, and they're playing for longer periods too. And yet, in 2026, one of the biggest names in gaming, Electronic Arts, was taken off the stock market entirely, sold in a $55 billion deal to a group led by a Saudi investment fund. This transaction is now officially the largest leveraged buyout of any company in any industry, ever. Microsoft has cut thousands of jobs across its gaming division. Studios have been shut down, and entire game projects, some costing hundreds of millions of dollars, have been quietly canceled or scrapped within weeks of their launch. So here's the crucial question. How can an industry pull in record revenue from record numbers of players and still feel like it's falling apart at the same time? Here's the twist that explains almost everything else in this story. These companies aren't actually running out of customers willing to spend money. They're running out of something much more limited: time. Think of it like a city with only 5 restaurants that everyone already loves and frequents every week. It doesn't matter how many new restaurants open around them. People only have so many dinners in a week, and most of those are already accounted for. That's essentially what has happened with gaming. According to industry tracking data, in 2024, well over half of all the hours people spent playing games went to titles that were already 6 years old or older. Only about 1 in every 8 hours was spent on something released that same year. On PC specifically, that share of older games is even higher, close to 2/3 of all playtime. The top 5 most played PC games alone accounted for roughly 1/3 of all tracked hours on the platform, and one game, Fortnite, consumed nearly 1/10 of all playtime across both PC and console combined. Despite having more players than ever, most are still locked into a small number of games they have been playing for years. New releases aren't competing for new customers. Instead, they are vying for limited time from an audience that is already fully booked. So why didn't these companies anticipate this? Primarily because many of them convinced themselves they were not truly game companies, but tech companies. This is an easy misconception to make. Games involve software, coding, development cycles, essentially the same language that tech investors love. Consequently, many studios embraced this identity, hoping it would lead to tech-level valuations. For a while, this approach worked. However, underneath the surface, they began to adopt the worst habits of the tech industry instead of the best. During the pandemic years, studios significantly overhired, operating under the assumption that the surge in new players would continue indefinitely. Some studios ballooned to thousands of employees almost overnight. When that growth eventually plateaued, layoffs followed. Once one large company began cutting staff, it became socially acceptable for others to do the same in the same quarter, as no one faced stock penalties for following suit. Next came the acquisition spree, akin to the instinct that drives tech giants to buy smaller competitors. Microsoft alone spent over $7 billion on one studio and nearly $70 billion on another, trying to create a gaming version of Netflix. This is similar to a city believing that acquiring every restaurant will suddenly encourage people to eat out more often, assuming that having more choices will expand appetites. In reality, people's schedules remain the limiting factor, not the variety of options. Once studios recognized that attracting new players was extremely challenging, many opted for a different strategy. They decided to create one massive game so compelling and engaging that it becomes one of those 5 staple options players return to time and again. This strategy carries immense risk, and the list of recent failures is striking. One major studio spent roughly $200 million in 8 years developing a hero shooter, only to sell an estimated 25,000 copies before shutting down within 2 weeks of launch and issuing full refunds to everyone. Another studio faced a similarly severe setback with a superhero-focused live service game that performed so poorly it triggered a public write-down worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This year, one of the most painful examples of corporate miscalculation has unfolded at Bungie, the studio behind Destiny. After investing years and significant resources into a new extraction shooter called Marathon, hoping to diversify beyond its aging flagship title, the launch fell far short of expectations. As a result, Sony ended up writing off over $700 million associated with the studio's underperformance in a single fiscal year. Destiny 2 received its final piece of content this past June, marking the official end of nearly a decade of continuous development. Shortly after, the studio laid off most of its remaining Destiny team, and the head of the studio stepped down. This situation highlights a recurring pattern in the business world. Companies often bet everything on a single massive hit and can be completely blindsided when it fails. If you're interested in seeing how these substantial bets play out behind the scenes, there's a channel that breaks down these stories every week. Consider subscribing so you won't miss the next one. Adding another layer of difficulty, creating a truly massive game has become extraordinarily expensive. Court documents from a recent legal case revealed that a single entry in a major military shooter franchise cost around $700 million to develop, before even beginning marketing efforts for a game that wasn't dramatically different from its many predecessors. On the other hand, it has never been easier for small independent teams to release games on platforms like Steam. Over 19,000 games were launched there in a recent year, and nearly half received fewer than 10 user reviews total. This creates an overwhelming flood of competition at the lower end of the market. As a result, the middle ground has been squeezed out, games that are polished and ambitious but not produced by hundreds of people. However, when studios do invest properly in this middle space, it can lead to significant success. For instance, one breakout hit last year was developed by a core team of only about 30 people, with a budget under $10 million. It went on to sell around 5 million copies and garnered major industry awards. This proves that the model isn't broken, it's just being overlooked in favor of overly safe or excessively risky bets, with a significant lack of funding in between. The video game industry faces a significant challenge due to a wave of copycat games that undermine original creations. When a game achieves success, numerous low-quality knockoffs are quickly released on platforms like Roblox, often lacking creativity but filled with their own microtransactions, leaving the original creators without any compensation. This situation might sound familiar. The video game industry experienced something similar in 1983, when a flood of cheap, poorly made copies led to a staggering decline in American home video game sales, dropping by about 97% in just 2 years. While history doesn't repeat itself perfectly, this pattern is eerily similar. The underlying lesson here is that the industry hasn't been disrupted by fewer players or less money. Instead, it has hit a wall due to a fundamental limitation: the number of hours in a day. Companies that believed unlimited growth was feasible in a market constrained by this limited resource were bound to face this reality, regardless of how much revenue they generated. So, is the video game industry actually dying? Not at all. However, the era where every new release automatically deserves your attention because it exists is clearly over. Studios that have yet to acknowledge this shift are likely the ones making headlines for their struggles. If you have one of those backlog libraries filled with games you've never played, share how big it actually is in the comments. Many of us are probably guiltier than we'd like to admit. If you enjoy exploring how an industry can be financially thriving while simultaneously facing real challenges, that's the type of content we cover every week. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next video.